Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Elk Grove Unified School District Board of Education special board meeting for November 7th, 2023. Good morning and welcome to our special board meeting. The Elk Grove Board of Education has resumed full in-person board meetings unless remote attendance is permitted pursuant to the California Brown Act. Live streaming of full in-person board meetings will be available to the public via the Zoom platform. Today's meeting is being video recorded and will be available on the district's YouTube channel. I'd like to share some public comment information. During special board meetings, the public may make public comments on items that are on the agenda. Individuals with comments on general school district issues may address those at the next regularly scheduled board meeting. Requests to make public comment will be accepted for an item up until the board president introduces the item. Generally, members of the public will be given 3 minutes to address the board. If there are 15 or more comments on a specific item, the board will reduce individual comment time to 2 minutes each. If there are 30 or more comments on a specific item, the board will reduce individual comments to 1 minute each. Individuals may not defer their time to another individual speaker to increase their total speaking time. Please be mindful that district students may be watching. You're encouraged to address the board and the public in a respectful manner, such that those observing from children to adults are made to feel welcome, safe, and valued. The board shall not permit any disturbance or willful interruption of board meetings. Persistent disruption by an individual or group shall be grounds for the board president to provide a warning and then to terminate the individual's privilege of addressing the board. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I didn't pick on anyone in advance, so I'm happy to take volunteers. Otherwise, I'll lead it myself. Anyone have a desire to lead the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. Thank you. Our next item is our first of 2 items today. I'll call on Miss, it says Amari Watkins. You don't look like Amari Watkins. So come up, Dr. Coates. This will be the presentation on one-time and new funds.
Awesome. Let me pull it up. All right. Well, thank you very much, Madam President, trustees, staff, and public. Excited to be here today to give the update on one-time and new funds. This has been a team effort for sure. So I'm actually going to kick it off to Superintendent Hoffman to ground us in our work.
Thank you very much. So looking forward to this really good opportunity to kind of do a check-in with following up work that we did in the spring at our March special meeting, where we're really looking at the conversion as we're moving out of the ESSER world and the federal one-time funds moving away and moving into the longer term solutions for many of the services that we put in place. So first slide, as we always use during these type of presentations, is going back to the agreements, and these are the budget planning principles that we've actually had in place now for several years. We've used them directly with the board, we've used them with our bargaining units, and it's a ability to keep us focused in the order in which we're doing the work. So obviously, first one is remaining fiscally solvent. We will never put ourselves in a situation where the state would come and take us over, so we always make sure that that part's taken care of. Number 2 is something I do think that makes us a little different than other districts, and one of the pieces that we commit to is maintaining, evaluating the effective programs and services that we currently have in place. Many times what you'll see with education funding, because it ebbs and flows so much, as you'll see a great buildup of great ideas and great things, and then as soon as the economy drops a little bit, districts have to eliminate really important programs. So there's an ebb and flow piece. So our goal is to make sure that we keep programs that are working in place by finding ongoing dollars to fund them as soon as we can. Number three is critical. We know that the most important work is done with the staff that are interacting with our kids on a daily basis and all of the support folks that are there to make sure that work happens. So making sure that we have the best and brightest employees who reflect our diversity and with our students is critical. And I commend the board for the work that they did in the last round of negotiations, where we really not only went after competitiveness, but went after the equity within the bargaining group people that we have. So it was really important. Number four, we want to make sure when there's opportunities is to build upon programs that we know are already working. A lot of those would be what we see at number two. The idea is Avid is an example. So we've had Avid at our middle and high schools for a long time. We've had the opportunity to expand Avid into the elementary. So we know it's a proven program that's worked well for years and years. And so before coming up with a new idea, we'll often try to build out existing programs. And then from time to time, we have enough money to actually consider new things. And so we've actually done that through the last budget process prior to the I said, I don't want to use the word ESSER much longer, and I've really tried to move away from the pandemic. But the reality is prior to the pandemic, we did add a number of new programs and services and created new offices and departments in the district that didn't exist before, such as equity and family and community engagement. So examples of these shared principles being put into practice over several years.
Do you see a priority ranking in these principles?
They're in the order in which we go after them, I believe. They're done in that order.
So that looking at this, we would consider adding new programs and services after we look upon building upon existing programs.
As a general rule, that's what we've done. Yes.
And existing programs that we have are really in two categories, correct? One is fully funded through general fund and the other is funded through ESSER money. So we have two categories of existing program services and personnel.
No, I wouldn't. I think what the board gave us direction to do in March is we're really making the conversion from the ESSER positions and the ESSER services into the board priority process that we used previously. And so that's when the board gave us direction to use, and we'll go through the block grants and go into some of this detail, but we went into the board gave us direction to move forward with the positions that are in the ESSER plan beyond when the ESSER dollars go away, and to use at that time the first block grant to cover that work. So it was a different funding source. And we put them back into the board priority process and pulled them out of the ESSER plan. But that was the direction that the board.
But they got funded through block grant as opposed to ongoing.
Which is always how we've done our budget development process. Is when we've had one-time dollars, we built out what we could in ongoing dollars. But when we converted more than $100 million worth of board priorities into ongoing over several years, we started off with one-time dollars that we had to do that. So that's consistent with how we've done in the past.
Except that right now we're being asked to go forward without the evaluation data on the effectiveness of programs and services.
Okay.
No, we're not.
Hold on.
You want to get into a
sounds like
debate
we're
that's
getting
not
into
there right
discussion,
now, but
so-
that's fine.
Can we complete the presentation first? It sounds like there are points trying to be made and there will be ample time for that to happen, but let's receive the information and the update first, okay?
Yeah, so first piece is the ESSER funds are going away. The board gave us direction with the updated version of the ESSER 3 plan, which confirmed that we were going to spend the dollars out through the end of this school year. They gave us direction with 3 major projects that if we had any additional ESSER dollars that weren't expended through the regular process, that we would fund them in large projects to finish up the ESSER fund. So in reality, this is the final year of the ESSER funds. And again, my goal is down the road is we don't talk about ESSER positions anymore. We talk about the priorities of the district moving forward. We do have direction that we'll be looking for, and not full direction, but just kind of kicking the ball off with regards to the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant. That grant we actually have to have a plan for. We have this year and 2 more years to expend those dollars. So the goal is to bring a plan back to the board for approval late winter, early spring. So we will be able to really a July 1 kickoff, but we could do some things prior to July 1 once the board approves the plan. And then the other piece is there's a couple of new funding streams that are actually available now to the district, and one of those is Prop 28, which is an ongoing source for visual and performing arts funding, which is a phenomenal thing. We've looked for a funding source for that for a long time, and that built some things into the general fund already, have done some ESSER work with that, and now there's actually an ongoing funding source through Prop 28, which is very exciting. So I'm going to use ESSER as a kind of a separate topic again, with the idea that that last line in there, the ESSER funds will exhaust by September of 24. So this is the last hurrah with regards to the federal one-time dollars that we're very appreciative of, that allowed us to better serve our students, take care of our staff, and actually put very valuable programs and services in place. A lot of work to do with regards to evaluating them and determining which ones we would recommend for long-term implementation, but very thankful for the federal government and their support of that. In the ESSER 3 grant itself, there was $134.6 million was our original allocation. We have about $59 million at the writing of this, and there's less than that now because every day we're spending more of those dollars, and those dollars will go away. We'll spend them, so they'll be gone by September of 24. We do have 300 plus positions tied into those dollars right now, and those positions are in our schools. They're at the district office. They're providing very important services, and we'll highlight a few of those in the next couple of slides. So the money that came through from the state government as a way to help districts roll out of the federal dollars and move forward with some additional one-time funding, because everybody knows that the funding cliff was coming with regards to the federal dollars. And the state was in a place where they had significant dollars available to them. And so they identified 2 block grants that were available to districts. The very next year, the economy wasn't doing so well. So what you see in the first column is the original allocation. And so for the Learning Recovery Block Grant, $71.3 million. That was reduced in this year's budget proposal and ultimate signed budget by the governor to $61 million. The Arts, Music, Instructional Block Grant was reduced not nearly as much, from 37.4 to 36.1. We have a June 28th spend date on the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, and a June 26th for the Arts, Music, Instructional Block Grant. But at the bottom line there is it's an $11.5 million reduction in those 2 block grants over what we were originally promised from the state government. The state made the decision to use that money to pay the full COLA to districts. So they actually used one-time dollars to fill an ongoing payment, which is an interesting concept. So we appreciate the COLA being fully funded, but obviously an $11 million reduction in these 2 grants poses some challenges. The one thing I will note is we have not spent a dollar of either one of these 2 grants. We did get direction from the board with regards to the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, but we haven't spent a dollar of it yet, and we haven't spent a dollar of the Arts, Music, Instructional Materials Block Grant because we knew additional work needed to be done. So we did add, there's two slides, this slide and I did add back into the presentation. This is actually the same slide that we presented to the board previously in a budget update. But we did get a couple of questions, making sure people were clear about the uses for the Learning Recovery Grant and the VAPA grant. So we have this explanation here. So original funding, 71 million, revised down to 61 million. Funds can be used for stabilizing instructional time, decreasing staff ratios, learning supports for tutoring, pupil supports to address barriers, instructional credit deficient students, and academic services for monitoring benchmark assessments. The real plan behind the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant was for districts to have a funding source to keep the things that they had built in their ESSER plans going beyond September of 24. And so again, there wasn't a plan that was required for this one, and the board did give us original direction to the ESSER positions to make sure those were covered for the next 2 years. And we've made that announcement. It's in our job posting. So when people go to look to apply for a job, they know that those jobs don't end in September of 24, that they go through at least 26. So that's been helpful in the recruitment process. So appreciate the board's direction on that. The Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Block Grant, again, $37 million, moved down to $35 million. And the title is interesting, and it is, and there are things related to arts, music, and instructional materials, but there's much more available in this grant than what the title would indicate. So standards aligned professional development and instructional materials in a variety of areas, and we'll show some of those for you through a link, instructional materials and professional development, culturally relevant books, operational costs, which really opens up and gives districts flexibility if needed to use those funds to pay for employee costs or other things that they need. And then also if there's an additional need for COVID-19 or pandemic type services or supplies, that's covered as well. This is the most flexible of the dollars that has been presented to school districts. That's not my opinion. That's just how it's set up. There does have to be an adoption of a plan approved by the board. And again, those dollars should be and need to be expended by June 30th of 2026. Can you hit the link real quick? We just think this might be helpful for people. This is the actual website with regards to the most commonly asked questions with regards to the discretionary block grants. And so that first one is, and they call it the AMIN. They always got to come up with so I've never actually called it AMIN before. So AMIN is their term for it. But what are the allowable uses for the AMIN grants, which is the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Grant? And so if you slide down to the first bolded piece, you'll see standards aligned instructional materials and professional development. And visual performing arts is the first bullet, but world languages, mathematics, science, English language arts, you see there's a wide variety of instructional areas that these funds were directly designed to be used. With regards to professional development, again, those are the areas, the instructional areas where they highlighted. Improved school climate is another key component of the areas in which that grant was designed to be used. The diverse, culturally relevant, multilingual libraries, operational costs, and COVID-related things to COVID-19. So just to make sure we're clear that the intent of the legislation, this is the FAQ from the CDE website with regards to the breadth of things that can be used in that second block grant. So when we had the conversation back in March, one of the big conversation was there were 385 positions at that time that we had identified in the ESSER plan. So we did a deep dive into those positions. We spent time with our bargaining partners, and we actually narrowed that list down to about 301 positions. We identified some positions that we just weren't going to be able to fill. We also identified positions that we thought were going to be needed as we worked through the process, and we found other ways to do the work. But the board gave us the original direction to take care of the $31.8 million, which actually covers 301 positions for an additional 2 years. And that would cover it through the one-time block grant, the first block grant. So we've been moving forward with that direction. And at that point, we moved the ESSER positions into the board priority format. And we made the commitment, and that commitment stands today, is that we will not bring a recommendation to the board to make any of those positions ongoing until we can show evidence of what they're doing for our kids and our schools. So the non-personnel, beyond the people, there was an additional $16 million of services and things that we had in place through the ESSER funding. And what we had an agreement with from direction from the board is that we are going to keep those items in place for at least one more year beyond the 2024 school year in June. And so $16 million to be able to keep those in place for an additional year. With the original $71 million that we received for the first block grant, we very comfortably were able to cover the 2 years worth of people because that would have come to about $62 million. Leaving $9–10 million to be able to cover some of these $16 million in costs. The other thing we knew, of the 300 positions that were built into the plan, there would always be a vacancy rate of some kind, and whether that was 5% or 10%. If it was 10% as an example, so we had 90% of the positions filled at all times, that would mean there would be an additional $3 million that would be available in that first block grant each of those 2 years. Well, that's an additional $6 million added with the $9–10 million that we already had left over in that first block grant, covered all of these items. So we really, in March, we were at a place where we felt very comfortable using just the first block grant to be able to cover 2 years worth of the board priority positions and 1 year of the board priority goods and services, just using the first block grant and not having any conversation about the second block grant at that time. So this is where we are now, November of 23. We needed to have a conversation with the board about the potential impact of the reduction of both block grants. So we wanted to make sure we were clear with the board about that. We want to make sure we're still challenged with filling all of the positions that are within the list of the board priorities coming out of the ESSER, and we're still working hard to fill those positions. And we're also evaluating those positions, programs, and services to determine which of those we would recommend ongoing down the road. So those are the challenges that we're all faced with. We shared this information with the leaders of our bargaining partners last week, so they have an understanding of what the challenges are, and that's what we're sharing with the board today. So there's different ways to get there as far as being able to solve the challenges. One thing is, like we did last time, is to go back and take a look, is 301 positions the right number of positions? We moved from 385 previously, we scaled that back to 301. So we did spend some time looking at, is that the right number? We do have to consider, the balancing the use of, we have 2 block grants where we thought everything could be done in 1 block grant previously. So potential balancing the use of the block grants. Obviously, evaluating programs and services, we're committed to that. We could identify other funding sources outside of either of the block grants. And then ultimately, our responsibility is going to be identifying which of these expenditures can be supported with ongoing dollars. There may be an opportunity when we do the first interim board report, budget report to the board in December, and depending on what the governor proposes as his budget in January, that there may be some additional dollars within the general fund where we could start to make some decisions about things on the board priority list that could be ongoing sooner than later. And if we did that, that would reduce the amount that we would have to use the block grant to cover, because ultimately, many of those things I think we'll want to have as ongoing. And the sooner we can start that process, that'll keep us from having a funding cliff a couple of years out. So being able to go about that strategically. So a couple things that we've done as staff and then working with the bargaining units is we did go back and review all of the 301 positions and just say, is there a way to reduce those anymore? Because that would cut down what we would have to spend out of the first block grant to cover those. And the other piece is in the one-time actions and services, is there anything we could reduce there? So we'll go through a little bit of detail, but we do have a recommendation. From the 301, the recommendation is to roll down to 297. So again, 4 positions, and they're not all whole positions. But that what that reaffirmed for me as the team did this work and the feedback from our labor partners is we did a good job the first time when we went from 385 to 301. And now there was just a slight adjustment. It wasn't like we found another 50 or 60 positions that we didn't think are worth filling and continuing to work on. So we thought that was I was actually pleased with that, knowing it causes us some challenges with regards to the amount of money it'll take to fill them all. And then we did find some more significant reduction available in the one-time opportunities, and some of that was they were more COVID specific. So we completely pulled out the cozy room. That used to be the extra staff that we had in the office and dealing with kids and staff that were dealing with symptoms of COVID. So we also found some ways to already fund school sites and increase their site allocations. So we didn't need to do that in a one-time basis through these dollars. So we'll go through a little bit of detail on that, but this just helps us in being able to reduce what we need with regards to cover all the priorities moving forward. So these are, if you add this up, this is the 4-point-some positions that we're proposing come off of the list. Everything here is the work is being done. The school office assistants, these are schools that are fully staffed, but don't at this point don't need the additional body in the front office. And I think one case they physically just don't even have any more space for a person. The research analyst work, we're being able to cover that work through our research and evaluation department. So none of this work goes away, but we found a way to do it, and can the recommendation would be to take those positions off of the list. The other thing we did, this is the non-personnel actions and services, and these are areas that we think we can pull off of the list because we have other funding sources to cover, or they truly were one time in nature and we've got them taken care of. And so there's not a need to build them into the future plans. And so this just helps us go from the 16 million to the 11 million plus that we need moving forward. So this is the implications. If we move forward with the recommendations, we can't afford the positions that we've agreed to fund through June of 26, which is very good news. We have an 11.7 million gap to fund the one-time services through June of 25, which we've stated we would do. So a couple options as far as being able to figure that out. If there's a 10% vacancy rate within the position, so we're 90% filled at through that entire 2 years, there's about $3.2 million that would be available in the first block grant, just like the last time when we thought we had more money there to be able to cover some of the $11.7 million gap. So there will be the difference between the vacancy rate number and the $11.7 million gap to fund the one-time services, that we have to have another funding source to be able to cover those things. A couple of places that make sense and that are available to us. The first one of those is the second block grant. And then the other one would be the general fund reserve. Those are two places where we have one-time funds available that would, by definition, allow us to spend in either of those areas. So I will stop with that, because the next piece we're going to go into is new funds, which are probably more fun to talk about than funds that are going away and one time in nature. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Looks like we're going to proceed.
Okay. With that, I think I get to be quiet for a minute.
All right. Well, good afternoon. So this is exciting news to talk about. These are the new funding sources, the Proposition 28 arts, music. I must have hit that. Music education funding that was voter approved. In fact, new estimates just came out yesterday, changing the estimated amount for Elk Grove to approximately 8.9 million. There is an annual report. These are state funds and are tied directly to Proposition 98.
Kristen, can I do one thing real quick on that?
Sure.
There has been a little bit of confusion between the second block grant, which is one-time funds that the governor and legislature developed and gave to school districts, versus the voter approved Proposition 28. Those are two separate things. The voters didn't have an impact outside of they voted for the governor, but they didn't have a direct impact on the establishment of either of the two block grants, but the voters did vote for Prop 28. And so that's in place, and those are ongoing dollars it's actually, there's a good and bad side to it. The governor can't change it. The legislature can't change it or take it away like they did our block grants. This is voter approved. The challenge is you have to implement it the way the voters voted for it. And there are some sticky points that we'll kind of work through in the process, but just making a distinction between those two seemingly similar things, they're actually very different.
Thanks for that. And then there's the LCFF equity multiplier that is part of ongoing funds. And it really focuses on a few of our schools, and those schools could change. We'll go into that a little bit more. It is tied to our local control accountability plan, but as already mentioned, it is ongoing. So taking a look first at Proposition 28, as the superintendent just described, this was a voter approved with very specific ballot language. The newly revised, which is not reflected here because we just got it last night, is about 8.9 million, not including Elk Grove Charter School. And we are now expecting the first apportionment to come to us February of 2024. The allowable uses, instruction and training, supplies, materials, arts educational partnerships for programs for any of the visual and performing arts area. Really important about this proposition is that 80% of the funds must be to employ certificated or classified staff. And so that's going to be the major challenge. We have a robust arts roadmap, which is great. It just means that we are prepared to implement the use of these funds. What will be the challenge, as it will be for every district throughout the state of California, is this requirement that 80% is going to be used on staffing, just because we're all looking for the exact same type of people to come and implement these
Yeah,
programs.
1,100 districts will be looking for arts people all at the same time.
Yes. All right, and the LCFF equity multiplier has changed kind of several times as we've presented the budget throughout the year. These schools that are identified could be the same annually, or they could change annually depending on what they are looking at. So we've got Daler and Limebach and Rio Cazadora High School. These allocations that they've received are directly related to those schools, not centralized. They are intended to provide additional ongoing resources to the targeted populations that help close historic disparities in student performance. These are funds and the goals will be reflected in our LCAP. And they are very much like title federal dollars where you are, they need to supplement what already exists. You can't supplant what is currently existing rather.
And just one more piece to add, it will be challenging with regards to these funds, and it'll be interesting to see if they come up with some type of solution for this. Is that if a school falls out of qualifying for this the following year, tying staffing needs to things like this when you don't know whether that funding source is going to be there the following year is a challenge. But you could run into a situation where these dollars may be available to a school multiple years, and having people tied to those dollars would be beneficial in that case. So we're going to have to do some work to ferret this out a little bit, and I think there'll be some learning across the state because this was an attempt by the governor to address concerns that were within the legislature and some other advocacy groups with providing districts with additional dollars to really specifically target student groups of need. And this isn't what they were looking for. So they're not completely satisfied with this model. So it will be interesting to see if it morphs in any of the upcoming budgets, but we're working through with the information that we have at this point.
So while brief, those are the two resources. I think the good news in the last 24 hours is we have an indication of when we're going to receive that first apportionment for Proposition 28. As Chris had mentioned, we're looking really closely to what's happening and what the governor will come out with, at least in an initial proposal in January, knowing that kind of what the tea leaves are reading is that the tax receipts are not as favorable as they maybe thought they would. So, I think that's something that we should be mindful of, that we're not expecting maybe a big COLA depending on what happens. And so what our next steps are, and I'll start with this and then of course chime in, is to revisit that arts roadmap that has existed, make any necessary updates to that, create the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant plan, and create a plan for Proposition 28, the arts and music education funding that was voter approved. And then what we'll need to do is build the LCFF equity multiplier into the LCAP. Open for discussion.
Okay, folks. After the presentation, I am to go to Ms. Lavasser and ask if there are any public comments via Zoom.
Madam President, we have several public comments via Zoom. So first public comment is Melissa Peterson. Okay, we'll go to the next. Next public comment is Deanna Williams. No. Next public comment is Lisa Lai or Lee. Next public comment is Tuyen Tran. Next public comment is Teresa Nguyen.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay.
Hello.
Hi. I appreciate this opportunity to share as an employee and alumni of the Elk Grove Unified School District. I have a firsthand experience the effects of the economy on the arts, and I appreciate the shared budget planning principle number 2, which maintains an effective program. It would highly benefit our program I'm a part of right now because we face challenges as simple as getting a color pencil pack for each student. With the economy rate, each color pencil pack costs now $10, and this allocation of funds would really benefit our students. With things costing more nowadays, our project fee has stayed the same. So it's been difficult to afford that for our students. And in addition, the operational costs to maintain our performing arts centers would be appreciated with how we will maintain the standards of our programs to be competitive with other districts. And to comment on how we're improving the school climate, the arts programs also contribute to that through like PBIS. For example, my school has reached out to others, and we've done murals for other schools, and we've done art murals for our own. And so in all, I would just like to emphasize on the importance of supporting the arts and its continuation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen.
We have one more public comment via Zoom. Wendy Rylick.
Okay. Ms. Jamerson, do we have any blue cards?
Madam President, we do not have any blue cards.
Okay, that concludes public comment. Do we have board member question or comments for this information/discussion item? It's not an action item today. Beth, go ahead.
Thanks. I have a few questions. The LCFF equity multiplier, that's a completely new beast in this LCAP LCFF thing, correct? Okay. And to qualify, in the past, it has been 55% plus for us to qualify. The number, is it a higher number? Is it determined differently?
It is determined differently. It's a rate that is rarely used, and I can't think of the name of it at this time. But if you recall, in May, we didn't have any schools that were going to be eligible, and they adjusted it. And then we had 3 schools that were eligible. So it is part of the free and reduced lunch rate, and it's also mobility within a in and out of a school or a system.
Okay, and I know there's been some improvement in us gathering our information to help us try to get back into supplemental and concentration funding as a district as a whole.
Yes.
And this work will parallel and help us in that as well.
Yeah, it's very possible with the work to make sure we're accurately identifying the students who may qualify under those, that we might have more schools qualify as the LCFF equity multiplier in the future.
Okay, you can't express enough the frustration of trying to do this job when you never know how much money you have. It is the most amazingly frustrating part of this job that I never even imagined, that we don't know our budget until we've already started spending it. So it is hard, and I'm sure it doesn't make sense to the public, and I'm going to tell you it doesn't make sense to us too, and it's not by choice. So I just needed to say that. I am thrilled we have Prop 28 money. It's 8.9 million. I want to make it really clear to anybody who's watching, we have no intentions of doing anything with that but spend it on arts. And we are thrilled to have it. And it is a complete improvement for us. And also with what we are doing with our arts right now, if we choose to use some of our AM/IM funding, we will not be taking any money away from arts that we are spending at this moment, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I believe a large portion of this should go to arts. But I also believe it's very clear that it was not made only for that factor. And I went to the California Department of Education to look it up. I think it's very, I think it was deceptive. And I think that left us holding a hard bag because I think it's deceptive and then we have to make up some things. So I don't think it's an easy place to be in. I definitely feel that we should not spend it, that a large portion of it should be spent on arts. And that's what I'll say. But I also do not have a problem with committing up to a third of it to be for the instructional materials portion. It's an arts. I can easily say that. I would like to see the list, but personally, if we're having a discussion and people want to know, it's kind of 3 parts. And I think a third of it is instructional material, and that's what we're trying to continue. So up to 10 million. I would also like to see if there's a savings that's not, it's like when I give my kids $10 to go to lunch, and if it costs 5, I expect 5 back. I don't expect them to go spend 10. So if we end up doing this, which I don't have any problem with, if it ends up being less than needing 7 or 6 million, I expect that money to come back into this block grant and we'll work with it from there. So I think that's kind of where I stand on those 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Albiani. Ms. Jamerson?
Thank you for clarifying a lot of that, because those were the questions that I was going to make sure that the community understands as well. So thank you so much. In agreement also with a lot of what you said. I do have a question on slide 11. When we talk about the recommended staffing reductions, when we talk about the office assistant, you said that that is a fully staffed office, because I know that we have heard from our classified staff who've had challenges, specifically our office assistants. And I just want to make sure that we're not putting undue burden when we're making some of these choices here.
Yeah, this recommendation came from the site level, and that they're comfortable with this recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I know that sometimes we have to reallocate workload and kind of maneuver all of that around. And I just want to make sure that we are also compensating fairly for anyone kind of taking on extra workload as well. So just thank you. And then that was all of my questions. I appreciate it. And I too agree with Ms. Albiani in terms of how we direct the spending with the block grant.
Ms. Segala, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't have any questions. The presentation, I learned a lot from it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fortuna.
Yeah, I'll start off with a compliment to the superintendent. You did a good job of stelling the recommendations that you would like to see. Unfortunately, I don't agree with them. There were several slides that came up that were not in the agenda materials, 2 of them. And why was that?
It was 2 of them that were presented to the board in a previous presentation, and in my one-on-ones with a couple of board members, they said it might be good for the public to see the reminders of the uses for the 2 block grants. So that's why we took the 2 slides that we used previously that explained the uses for those 2 block grants. So we added those in, and then we'll update the presentation that's on the posted agenda. We'll update with this presentation so that people have it moving forward. We didn't want to switch it in the middle of it, but it's good. It might cause confusion.
Yeah. With respect to Prop 28, that was voter approved. We don't have any choice with respect to whether or not we can raid those funds. Those funds have to stay with VAPA programs. So we might feel good that we wouldn't cut into VAPA, but you can't do it anyway. With respect to the block grant, that has come up several times at board meetings. And what just absolutely amazes me is that the conversations we're having now, we're not explored at those earlier times. And for me, it feels like deception, that the plan all along was to put in front of the board a recommendation to raid funds that were intended for VAPA. The legislature chose to act, in my opinion, in an irresponsible way in providing the wiggle room. But this Board of Education does not have to act in an irresponsible way and could utilize all that block money for the VAPA programs, which are just beginning to have life restored to them. One of the recommendations of the executive committee adopted by this Board of Education was our vision of having VAPA programs becoming part of the curriculum as opposed to something that you did on top. We did not want to see it as an extracurricular type of activity, but rather a part of ongoing program and meld it into everything we do.
Now we'll be able to do that because the Prop $28 need to be spent during the school day. They're not actually designed for after school. So that vision that was developed years ago, there is now an ongoing funding source to be able to do some, probably not all of it, but some of that work.
I perfectly understand that.
Making sure
I'm
everybody
not
does.
stupid.
This is not just for you,
Okay,
Mr.
let's-
President. This is
let's-
for the
let's calm
public,
down
so
with the
everybody
tone, okay?
understands. Not everybody understands everything to the degree you understand everything.
Well, everybody in this board certainly should.
Okay.
Um,
I want to remind you about the level of professionalism you implore us to have. So let's try to set a good example.
oh, that was an unprofessional statement that people should be prepared.
No, I'm not stupid. I think it's clear that there was a clarifying statement being made. So
Oh,
let's.
If
just
you were privy to
understand.
other conversations, you might look at it very differently.
No, I was not. Same level of preparation you have, sir.
That's not what I said, Nancy.
Okay.
Let us go to slide 12. Those items on that slide are for reductions, correct?
Yeah,
But it
so
says-
that's what you see on the next coming slides. Yes.
So can you share with me how the last two items on that page became to be listed on this list of reductions?
I'm not sure. I'm not following you. Which on page 11, there's only two statements.
12.
He's on
Oh,
12.
We're on
okay.
12.
Got it. And the confusion is that we added the two slides in, so that's the confusion. So you're talking about the recommendation for non-personnel actions and services. Contract to
It's because they're not all reductions. Some of them are being switched to other funding sources, as it says there.
What did you say?
They're not all reductions. Some of them are being switched to other funding sources.
That's not what I asked. I asked to explain the last two items on that slide. Contract with arts organizations for PL to support the VAPA framework and standards. Contract with organizations to provide arts education in elementary schools.
cabinet. Can anybody help me? I don't remember every single item and every single list. So Jen?
So those were removed because the $50,000 portion of it is something that we can embed into the funds that are allocated to CPL. So that's something we're doing ongoing so that as you mentioned earlier, VAPA is not a standalone. They're a priority content area, just like all the other subjects we have in the district. And then looking at the contracting, the second piece, that's something that we're looking at how we're going to utilize Prop 28. We do know that Prop 28 is going to allow us to, fingers crossed, to look at some classified and teaching artists. So that's what that funds are used for. So that will be utilized using the funds that, we just heard that I think are like over $9 million.
So we're putting that activity on the shelf until the Prop $28 are available?
No, because these are funded already through this school year. 23-24, and then we're receiving the Prop 28 funds in the spring of 24.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
May I ask a quick clarifying question on that? So on that one, we're not allowed to supplant, right, previous stuff. So this wouldn't be supplanting. This would be essentially, this would go away and we would be adding staff that would serve the same purpose, but this particular line item would disappear.
Yeah, at a much higher level. We'll end up, this will end up expanding, exploding, because it's the contracts with being able to hire people to do this kind of work will be significantly more through 28.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Well, once again, I'm just going to make a statement. I think we're putting the cart before the horse. We don't have the evaluation material. We're being asked to continue with programs and services, and we're going to continue those programs and services by, in my opinion, rating the money that is available in the block grant to support VAPA activities. Again, the legislature had VAPA right up there because that was the intention. But given that, again, in my opinion, we don't have strong leadership, instead of dealing responsibly with the fiscal issues, they put wiggle room language into the document such that boards would have to do exactly what we're doing right now. I don't support taking even $1 away from the block grant, and that's the end of my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fortuna. Mr. Vargas?
So our other option is essentially to use the general fund reserve. So how much is in the general fund reserve right now?
At adopted budget, there was about $55 million in unassigned. Consider that a one-time, right? Because once we start to spend that down, that goes away. We'll have an update mid-December at first interim of where we are.
Okay.
What is the total?
The total ending fund balance
Yeah.
committed and
Million and 100 and how many million?
You're off mic. You're off mic, Carmen.
What is it? 100 and how many millions of dollars?
I don't want to.
Yeah, since we're up around $130 million, there's a lot of money there.
A lot of that's committed to things the board has identified as committed.
So,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Vargas.
so basically, I think if we take into account all of the assumptions that you have on the implications of recommendation page, and we take into account that 3.2 million offset by the vacancy rate, we're looking at about 8.5 million that would come out of the general fund reserve.
Shouldn't be that high because it's 11. We reduced it to 11.7.
Right.
And then we have 3.2 and 3.2, so it's closer to the $5 million
Okay.
number. So I just want to make sure we're
So
pretty small.
I guess my question would be, how would that impact our financial situation, if at all? And does that create a concern if the money were to come out of the general reserve fund? Does that create a concern though?
It could create I think Ms. Albiani said it. We never exactly know. The budget is going to be exactly wrong, but approximately correct. And it is because it's just based on the best assumptions that you have at the time. So spending down any part of your ending fund balance, dipping into your commitments or in your reserve, We should always be watching that very carefully, especially if we're looking at anything that is ongoing in nature. And so if that is the direction that we're set to explore, we would pull that through the multi-year projections to really look at the impact that that would have.
You want to jump in?
Go ahead.
There's a very varied, there's a very varied, keep coming with the same word. There's different opinions on what the reserve fund should be on our board. And we've had people come and present what is statewide recommended, what we have, and they do vary greatly. So I don't have the numbers in front of me. I believe when we had someone come and talk to us, and I'm sure someone's happy to correct me if I'm wrong, 14% is what they recommended.
Best practice.
Likely, but we do have a reserve cap in effect that we can't have a reserve greater than 10%, and that is assigned or unassigned combined.
Yeah, so Michael, when we get into that part, it just it's carried us through. We've been a really conservative district and there's been really bad times and we haven't had to do some of the things other districts have because we're very cautious about our savings. And I'm speaking from my point of view, and there's our differing views that we should spend it down because it's for the students, and I understand that view as well, but I don't hold it. So just so you know, when you get into spending that, you need to be careful.
Then I think my position right now would be that I am interested in seeing what comes out of the sort of the analysis that goes along with what Ms. Albiani was suggesting, and looking and seeing what that plan looks like. Right. At the same time, like I am quite conscious of the fact that VAPA programs are very important and they impact particular communities and particular students, you know, in ways that are incredibly important. And I don't want to diminish that. And I know that we have a lot of VAPA need, you know, which Superintendent and I discussed earlier. And so I think so I'm interested to see what comes out of that analysis, with the understanding that if there is greater need, then it may be appropriate to take a small risk in order to meet that need. But I want to see what comes out of it at the next meeting. So,
thank you, Mr. Vargas. Mr. Bettis, anything?
Good report. Didn't like the fact that you added pages and didn't tell me. So
sorry about that.
It was no problem, but I had to add two per each page. But the 6 and 7 were very enlightening. I'm glad you did put those in. I agree with Carmen that we need evaluation. And what is the timetable in which we are going to receive those evaluations?
So we're beginning that work has already begun. And the commitment is before we bring a recommendation for anything to be funded ongoing, that we would share that information with the board and have the board have an opportunity to engage with that. So nothing's going to be brought forward to the board with an ongoing ask until we have the evaluation. And some things, again, the other piece is some things will be easier to evaluate than other things. I mean, trying to show a direct absolute cause from A and C, sometimes those are hard to do, but we are committed to doing that. And we've said that in front of everybody.
Okay. So is there actually any date we're going to get this data? Or data and evaluations?
I don't have a date. I will. I know Mr. Cerruti and the team have started to work through a process, so maybe we can get you a board communication the next couple of weeks. So we just kind of lay out what that process is starting to look like.
Okay.
Can I hold you right there, Tony, and ask a question based on Chris's response? If they haven't, you said they haven't worked on a timeline. Inherent in any evaluation is baseline information. If they haven't started yet, how do they have baseline?
Programs are always, the data is being developed and being dependent on whatever the particular item is being generated. We know what was, and what I'm saying is we're actually going through and putting it into a format for every single item that we'll be able to go through and put it in a very usable format. Right now, we do program evaluation across all the stuff that we do. But before we bring recommendations related to these board priorities, we'll have something in a very concise document that the board will be able to use, the public will be able to see as we work through and have these conversations. Because in the end, we're going to have really, really important things that are showing value, and we're not going to have the funds to do them all, potentially. And there's going to be really challenging discussions and ultimately decisions around that. And we want to make sure that we are transparent through that process. But there's a lot of work to be able to do that in a way, and in a setting that not very often does A plus B equal C. That's, I mean, if you ask the principals right now about the value of the campus supervisors on the elementary campuses, they will tell you they love those people, and those people are making a difference. How do you quantify and measure something like that? You do it, there's going to be some surveying of people and getting people's feel for it. It could be, number of conflicts because you now have an additional adult. So those are the kinds of things, but difficult to come up with a one-to-one. We put this in place and this is the exact result that we're getting. It's education. So some of those things aren't as cut and dry.
So we'll be back to a sales program.
I don't know what that means, but can we get back to Mr. Bettis?
You can use your reactions.
Mr. Bettis, did you have anything else?
Yes, so therefore, I just didn't know this was going to happen, but you plan to use VAPA funding, transition that cost, which is what, general fund or what's the funding? So
Block grant, separate block grant, one-time
yes,
block grant.
okay.
One-time block grant from the state.
And okay, very good. So that you have an idea that transition that to the Prop 28 funding, which I agree.
Expand, what we're really going to be able to do with the Prop 28 is expand what we're currently doing for the arts. We're going to go beyond what we're currently doing. We're going to be able to take some of the steps that we identified in the roadmap that we haven't been able to do yet.
I agree.
So so we're going to be able to, so it's not undoing what it's going to be, expanding what we're currently doing for the long term.
What I'm concerned about, and I support, Beth mentioned that she supported the current curriculum. How much did you mention? How much was that funding?
I don't think I mentioned current curriculum.
He's talking to me, actually. Tony, I'm sorry,
You mentioned you agree with the current art funding.
I wanted to make sure that none of our current art funding would be impacted by this decision.
Great.
And none of no art funding is getting taken away.
Okay, and you support that, okay.
And I support that. And then no money from the Prop 28 is being considered to do anything but used for arts. And that's a law and I support it and I wanted to make it clear. Those are the two things I said, Tony.
Okay, I support that, but yet I'm leery or concerned about how those VAPA monies that we're using. I think we were in the plans of buying a whole bunch of music instruments. Was that part of VAPA or this money's?
That's our existing plan.
That's our existing plan.
Right. So is that still on the table?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. So
we're
how
not
much is
stopping
that?
anything. Everything that we're talking about is going to be on top of what we are already doing.
Then we're going to go back and do an update of the arts roadmap because it's been several years since the teams come back together. We did a slight tweak to it, but we want to go back. And now that we have a long-term funding source, there's an opportunity to go back to make sure is there any adjustments that we want to make to it moving forward.
Okay, so what's the time frame and of that particular revised plan for this transition to Prop 28 funding?
So what we need to do is we need to bring kind of separate the two things. So Prop 28, that planning we haven't started yet. But what it's going to do is it's just a funding source that's going to be able to implement what we've already identified in the roadmap. So it's not like we're going to come up, but we need to go back and make sure the roadmap is what we want it to be moving forward. And so that's why we're going to do the update of that. The one-time block grant for the second block grant, we need to bring a plan to the board before we can spend any of those dollars.
Right.
We're going to do that work now.
Mhm.
We're going to bring a plan back to the board this spring with the idea of really a July 1 kickoff. Although if once the board approves it, if there's something we want to do before July 1, we could do that. But it's really a July 1 of 24 through June of 26. And we're going to bring, I think the way it will work is we will bring the board recommendations kind of in chunks. So one of the chunks could likely be, we need $3 to $6 million to cover the non-personnel items on the board priority list for one more year. $3 to $6 million, depending on how much of vacancy we have in the first block grant. The other piece would be other things that we think meet the letter of the law and are of value. A huge chunk of that will be VAPA-related things. What would make sense is that those VAPA-related things would be one-time in nature. They would be things that could help prop up and set the VAPA programs up for success as Prop 28 comes into play and we start to have people to be able to carry out program. We have to be careful of hiring people before we start using the Prop 28 dollars, because these others are one time, but it's really an opportunity to give VAPA and other academic programs, because it's the art and instructional. There's a lot. Our science folks, there may be some pieces within science classrooms from a technology standpoint to make labs better. There could be other instructional areas, and that's what this work and what the grant was designed to do. But we will bring you chunks, my estimate more than $36 million worth of stuff, and then allow the board to mix and match, say, okay, this is the 36, this is how we like the plan put together. And if there's something else, we either put that, it's important, but it'd be something we might do down the road. We could say that last thing is one of the buckets, like we're doing with the ESSER funds. So we want to fund these things, but if there's any money left over, this other thing that we thought important, we want it spent on that. So because we kind of learned our lesson with the ESSER plan, when you have these one-times money expire, it's always a good idea to have, and bucket is kind of a loose term, but a bucket where you can expend funds as they start to, before they go away, on things that are related to the topic, that are important and already identified by the board. So we don't have to come back like we did with the ESSER plan and add a couple of more buckets. So we kind of learned that lesson through the ESSER plan.
Very good. Waiting to see it
Thank you,
patiently.
Thank you, Mr. Pettit.
What, can I jump in with Tony before he gets too comfortable with his with the sales job? Because I think that while that was a really nice explanation,
The truth.
it also serves your sales purpose.
Can we disagree in a respectful manner?
Hey, let me finish with what was said.
Sales service is sarcastic, Carmine.
Respectful.
Just stop.
Never mind. Tony, the Proposition 28 money that's going to come is a piddly little amount of money.
Right.
But spread over all the programs, you're not talking about a load of money for everybody. So therefore, every dollar you take away from the block grant money that had VAPA as the top priority is $1 less you are funding VAPA programs. So the VAPA will be affected if even $1 is taken away from the block grant.
It's his opinion.
Yeah, that's,
I don't agree that it's his opinion.
yeah, let's just not go in circles. You know, we can disagree with each other and that's fine. Go ahead, Mr.
Can I
Hargis.
ask a quick-
But,
It is your time to
that's a-
speak, so.
okay, yeah, but I
it's
just.
done.
I
So
would-
might the science department, the science curricular area benefit from these dollars? VAPA is important, but might science, might world language, might any of the other instructional areas that are identified in the legislation,
Ethnic studies.
ethnic studies approved by the legislature, signed by the governor, might some of those other instructional areas benefit from some of these dollars? I think they might.
Exactly. Well, I guess that was page 6 and 7
I don't know what you're.
that you're
referring to.
mentioning, those areas. Was that page 6 and 7 of the report?
It's on the second page and there's a link at the bottom there, the CDE. So we pop that up. This is the CDE page.
Oh, yes, that one. Okay.
And you go
Right down further.
and slide down for me
Yes.
and look at all these instructional plans.
So,
Visual and performing arts, world language, math, science, English, history, ethnic studies, financial literacy, media literacy, computer science. That's in the legislation.
oh, I understand that. And I'm glad you put that out there in the, for my fellow board members that, because I did see that. And that's what exactly, and I was wondering how, that was probably my last question. How much money are you going to propose in those categories? Or do you?
We
Okay.
don't know yet. There's $35 million total,
Okay,
one time
All right.
that you get to spend over 2 years. Actually, you could have done it over 3 years, but we're going to do it over 2 years. But again, those are all the things that we could potentially do with
Yes.
this funding, all important
Yeah,
stuff.
we'll get there, Tony, to your question. That will come before the board and we will make those decisions. But what we're doing today is having a higher level conversation and previewing what the next steps are.
that media literacy is, everybody realizes that that's a big one now because of the lawsuits. So we need to be aware of, what's happening at the national scene. And is that considered also social media, also in that category?
Probably.
Or I'm talking.
I would assume, but I'd have to dig into it. I
Okay.
don't know off the top of my head.
Okie dokie. Very good. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you, Tony.
Can I make a really, really fast follow-up?
Go ahead, sir.
So when you were talking about the buckets and the different things that we're going to be able to kind of play with, something that I think would be useful is the level of need, because we have obviously a variety of different facilities that are in a variety of different shapes. One thing that would be, I think, useful for me as I'm looking through it would be like, where is the greatest need? What does that look like? How does that fit into things as we're doing it? And then the only other thing I wanted to surface was something we talked about earlier, which was going back to your where you said instructional materials. Having a bucket of that or a conversation about that would be helpful. But that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the questions and the comments that have been made. I will try to be as brief as possible. I want to address, because it's kind of a perennial issue for us, when and to what degree we dip into budget reserves. It's education funding is a roller coaster, so it's an ongoing issue for us. In October, the state of California anticipated receiving $44.9 billion in tax receipts, personal and corporate. They took in 17.3 billion. So just to get an idea of the information that is going to on which the state budget is going to be built and education funding, that's to give you a picture of where we're headed. So it's not that there's a rule about not dipping into budget reserves. It's when we do it, taking all the full context into consideration. And that's the context that we'll be operating in the next few months and in the next year. Through work, I spent a lot of time yesterday with the legislative staff and the governor's staff, all of the key folks on education funding, and they kept saying, we are headed into a different climate. You know, they're not saying recession yet. They're saying it's going to be a different fiscal climate next year. And of course, it comes with the reminders that education funding has a minimum guarantee. It's not everything, which is why we fluctuate, but education funding is somewhat protected by the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee, which means all of our state leaders are not predisposed to help us or protect us beyond that minimum guarantee because they're having to contend with the pressures from everywhere else in government, all of the programs that are not protected. So I think that's really important to bear in mind. Not the last time, I'm sure, in this year, in this budget preparation cycle that we're going to have this conversation, but just some factors that I think are important to consider. So I think it's really important to use the full name of the Arts, Music, Instructional Materials Discretionary Block Grant. I know it's really long and it's probably a pain to put that on slides, but that is the official name. It's the official name for a reason. You know, the folks in the legislature and the administration wanted to signal there's something in here for supporters of those programs, and they also at least were transparent that this is discretionary funding. There is no question that a lot of these funds will be used for arts education. There's no debate. I haven't heard a single person propose that not be the case. None. So, you know, if anyone's out there alarming and frightening supporters of VAPA and telling them that that's even a possibility, let me correct the record. I've not heard anyone suggest that even once. You know, the idea that funds be rated is just inaccurate. Because again, it is by definition a discretionary source of funding. We have been clear every single time this has come up that it is a discretionary source of funding. If you look at the legislative process, every single analysis by the Department of Finance, the legislative analysts, folks in the legislature, every single budget hearing, it was described as discretionary funding. So there is nothing that is being rated. These are new funds that are going to add on top of what we've already been able to do for visual and performing arts. And then Prop 98, of course, which comes with even stricter requirements, entirely additive, $8.9 million for arts education, 80% of which is going to be spent on hiring the people to do the work with our students. It has a supplement not to plant requirement, as Mr. Vargas pointed out, coming to us in the next year, entirely new funding. There are no proposals to reduce education, arts education funding. It is 100% additive. Reductions, I don't even think would be possible due to the requirements in Proposition 28. Where there may be disagreements is the degree to which we spend block grant funding on arts and what those actual, you know, what the details are within the roadmap, right? But we haven't even gotten there yet. Right? What we do know is at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot more money spent on arts education, not less, a lot more. So I just want to be really clear with folks. It's fine to have disagreements, but let's not alarm people unnecessarily. So with that, thank you very much for the presentation. Look forward to the next steps. And our next item, our long-awaited student board member initial report. Do we have Mr. Schweitzer is going to kick us off?
Oh, sorry.
Don't mess me up like that. All right. Good afternoon, Board President Chires Espinoza, members of the board, Superintendent Hoffman, and Ms. Avalos. I'm pleased to introduce our student board member, Isabella Segal. Today, she's going to give us an update on the highlights from her first couple of months as a student board member and a senior in high school, as well as share her goals for the remainder of the year. So with that, I welcome student board member Segal. Come on down.
Whatever you want.
Stay there?
Yeah, I'll stay here.
Good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Hoffman and Ms. Avalos. Okay, sorry, let me scoot in. Okay. First, I want to address kind of my goals and purpose. So first, one of my primary goals has been and is going to be to promote the student board member position. I want to make sure that it can be accessed by many qualified, dedicated students in the upcoming year. I and the other candidates have already brainstormed ways to do this and have looked into forms of outreach that we can employ in the upcoming year. I also want to facilitate effective communication with school candidates to establish formal rules and procedures, giving future board members that necessary support in order to fully represent the student body. This has been done with the creation of the Student Voice Council, which includes the other candidates and I. The council offers insight into what's occurring at each of the sites in our district, the high school sites. I also want to promote participation in student advocacy organizations like student equity councils, which are present at most sites in order to ensure the student voice is heard in EGSD. Okay, as far as collaborations, I will be working with the Superintendent Student Advisory Committee, the other student board member candidates who make up the Student Voice Council, Equity Program Specialists, and College and Career Connections Program Specialists. I will also attend Student Equity Council meetings, a couple of which I already have. As far as activities, I will I will facilitate site visits, interviews with student candidates to discuss concerns with the district. I will also attend the Young Men of Color Conference and the California School Boards Association Conference. So far, the other Student Voice Council members and I have recently began site visits and student interviews. Our findings are not representative of all of the sites yet because we have not been able to conduct interviews at some of them. We're trying to arrange that in the future, so that's currently what we're working on. However, from the information we have gathered so far, there are trends that we've noticed, and I've kind of outlined the trends here. The number one thing that has been brought by students to our attention has been a need for mental health resources. This is a request echoed by much of the student population. In our research specifically, they discussed the problem with counselor caseloads. Essentially, so many students assigned to each counselor that this is preventing them from getting the wellness support and individual attention they need. There was also a concern about the avenues that exist for reporting when students need essential and critical mental health support. At our sites, we did brainstorm possible solutions. We believe that working to fix counselor caseloads will in turn create more contact, feasible ways of reporting, and we believe that something as simple as spreading awareness about anonymous methods of reporting at each site will be critical. Many students also concluded that increased education about mental health could go a long way in reducing stigma that has been perpetuated by students and staff alike. Okay, so now on to the next point. As far as restrooms, I know this has been something discussed multiple times here. I just wanted to reiterate that this is one of the main concerns for students and be representative of what they did bring up in site meetings. There has been reported lack of cleanliness, excessive and unregulated vaping, and inaccessibility to basic resources. Okay, so the next topic has been a pretty big one, discrimination and hate on campus. My other representatives and I learned about a large amount of discrimination and hate that exists on the campuses district-wide. There were many shared instances of racial profiling, sexism, and a loose use of slurs, all of which came from students and staff alike. At Pleasant Grove High School, GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, held a drag show, and a lot of students reported receiving death threats from parents and adults. So student proposed solutions to this issue include more education for both staff and students, where there is an emphasis on both empathy and on voices who have experienced this discriminatory behavior. Students also noted that events celebrating diversity like multicultural rallies have made a difference to them. In this way, they appreciate the campus's efforts and encourage such events in the future. This also goes along with the next point, a need for I'm sorry, I'm behind on this, a need for effective and improved education. Many students expressed a desire for increased education and awareness for staff, specifically around appropriate conversation, along with an awareness of implicit and explicit biases, which have been expressed in the classroom. This goes along with the consideration of student complaints. Many students reported feeling that their concerns with staff members have not been addressed effectively. And then on to the transparent disciplinary processes. The students we spoke to at our sites agreed that confidentiality should be prioritized in terms of disciplinary processes. However, they've also expressed a desire for consequences and disciplinary processes to be more clearly outlined. Realistically, many students agree that a greater knowledge of these disciplinary processes serves as a deterrent for bad behavior. And also as a subcategory of this, this is something that was brought up at all of our site meetings. Students have been more vocal about wanting more adequate responses to sexual assault. They asked for a steadfast commitment to denouncing sexual assault and more support from the district and each of their sites in terms of this. And then finally, the provision of certain amenities. Many students brought up wanting certain amenities at their sites, such as air conditioning in locker rooms and shade structures for students waiting for buses. And then, oh, this is my contact and social media information. That's my email, and the social media, it's at EGOSD board or at EGOSD BM. Also for students out there, if you want information about board meetings or things broken down, you can reach me there, and I will be posting summaries of board meetings there too. Thank you. That's the end. I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed what I've learned so far.
Thank you, Isabella. That was fantastic. Questions, comments, anyone?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Let's start, I guess, on mine is finding some site visits and student interviews. You mentioned sexual assaults. That's very, very serious matter here. So are the students actually making a report on sexual assaults on campus and nothing's happening, or what?
It's different at each site. I think we've just kind of heard generally from students that they have heard about instances of sexual assault or reported instances of sexual assault, and they just want almost a clear sign from the district that that's something we denounce in a way. They just don't feel like they've received that so far.
Okay, well, that one, back in 2012, the first year I was elected to this board, and prior to that, I seen a lot of I consider it sexual assault when I used to come on campus and students.
Hold on. I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there.
Sexual assault is a crime. So we have to make sure
Hey.
we're very.
If it had been reported, it would have been dealt with that way. So let's just be very careful.
Again, I can't, my opinion about something like that,
Okay,
law enforcement would make a determination
Exactly.
whether a crime happened or not.
okay.
That's all I'm saying.
It's on public record. It's said on 2012 that I want that to stop. Groping of girls at football games. That was when I first came aware of, and nobody was doing nothing about it. And right away, I went to the principal. I said, "Hey, what's the policy here, allowing boys groping girls?"
I'm sure that's not what the policy said. So let's just be careful about our words and what we're implying.
Okay. Since then, let me tell you what happened. It was resolved as far as I was concerned, because immediately after that, within a month, I didn't see that happen at no football games or any events on campus. And I was looking for that. That was a very serious situation. Now, does that still occur? Is that an item in which students are talking about today?
She just told you it was.
What?
Yeah, I think, sexual assault is still a prevalent issue. If, yeah, it definitely is. I, I don't know specifically whether the students who brought this to us, reported what happened or not. I don't have that knowledge, especially because some of that happened at my other representative sites. I just kind of know the collective agreement of how students have expressed feeling about it.
So often what happens when we're not dealing with the firsthand information, we're talking about people who are essentially trading on rumors, right? Because of confidentiality. They are not aware of what, if anything, was done to follow up because we're not allowed to tell them. So that's why we just want to be really cautious in terms of speaking in generalities.
Well, but number one,
If anything, if an assault is reported on our campus, we immediately investigate and involve law enforcement. And as far as an actual determination of whether an assault happened or not, or a battery happened or not, that is the decision that is made by our resource officers. That's a decision. I'm not qualified to make that determination because I'm not trained as a law enforcement officer. So, but that's why we have the resources that we do with our law enforcement partners. And there are people on our schools every single day. So we're not having to bring somebody off of patrol. Not that that's a terrible thing either, but we actually have our dedicated folks that are working with our families anytime something like that is reported.
But other than the site officers, isn't the principal and administration already trained to report those type and follow up on those if they see it?
If they suspect it, they can't make the determination. If they witness something or someone brings them the information, then they're going to do the investigation. And if it appears that a law is potentially broken, then we will include our school resources officer, but they make the criminal determination.
Okay. And the question I have also, now that form that students have access or that software, are they not using it to report these type of incidents and being confidential?
No, students are using it. Yeah, they just expressed, a lot of students didn't know that was an option. So
Can you name that software for the general public also, please?
Oh, well, it's different at each site.
Catapult is the software program that we use.
Right.
For the incident reporting, but Catapult is the software program behind it.
Yeah, at Franklin, they're referred to as iCare forms.
So did this council do any data search on the number of incidents maybe that are reported through that process?
No, I don't. Are we allowed to access?
No, that would all be confidential information and that we would not give to students.
Maybe we board members need to see that type of report. Well, so maybe behind closed doors, we need to talk and deal with this issue.
You can be assured that Mr. Hoffman and I will follow up with Isabella on that. And I'm sure it's not the only point in her report, but can we move on?
And so we're going to get a report or a BC regarding this?
No.
Again, this is the beginning stages. Isabel has given you a rundown on the work that they're doing, and then she's going to come back at the end of the year with a completed presentation. This is letting you know how she's going about the work. But if there's anything that anybody comes across a serious situation that needs to be addressed, you can report it anonymously on the front website of every school website. You can find a trusted adult, and that situation will be addressed. Now, some people, there is the uncomfortable that people don't necessarily get closure on something because you can't tell what the consequences were and what was the final outcome of a situation. So inevitably that leaves people feeling incomplete in the situation, but we also have our counseling services to be able to help people work through that process. And there may be some other services that somebody would need long-term in dealing with that. But there's part of that disconnect that happens. But anybody has an issue, making sure it's clear for everybody, where they feel they've been put in danger, they've been treated unfairly, or a potential crime has happened on our campus or at one of our activities or to and from school, you let us know, and people let us know of other things that are not school related, and we will still make sure that we get them connected with the right resources to take care of the situation.
Oh, really good. On the page or the subject findings from site visits and student interviews, under restrooms, you have cleanliness and vaping in the bathrooms. What do you mean by resources, that last bullet?
Oh, I just mean like basic resources that should be in bathrooms. Some students reported just, not, yeah,
Toilet paper and all that.
exactly, yeah.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, no, just basic resources, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Necessities. Yeah.
Well, I guess there is new legislation for that, I think.
Not so new anymore.
One of those issues, I guess, right? Okay, thank you. Very good report. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
Isabella,
Yeah, can you get closer to the mic?
Isabella, when you met with different representatives and you had discussions about the student board rep position, did you get recommendations for them with respect to how we can continue to improve upon the communication process in terms of letting students know that the position's available?
Yeah, it's actually nice. We have a lot of, because of like our candidates in the Student Voice Council, we have them across the schools. So now we have more outreach than we have before. And we kind of brainstormed ways to make, almost assemblies or meetings at each school where we can kind of educate students about what the position means and when it's offered. And also specifically like ASB, student equity councils, spreading awareness about that, we think could help get it out there more too. So that's one of our main goals, especially getting a representative at each site to hold a meeting solely dedicated to information about the student board position.
Thank you.
Is that it? Anything else? Anyone? Go ahead, Ms. Jamerson.
Thank you so much for the report. I just wanted to acknowledge that restrooms has been on each of our student board members' report for the past 3 years, and that we've also heard from parents. And so I would really hope that we can address the issues in the restrooms since we continue to see that be an issue.
Thank you for your report and your time you're putting in addition to doing so well in school.
All right, thanks all. I would like to learn more about just about every single thing in that report, so I'm not going to take up meeting time with that, but I hope we can have a conversation about that later on. Very excited that those are the topics you picked to work on, and I think they will be very valuable for us. So thank you very much for that. Next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Ms. Lavasser, do we have any public comments for this item?
Madam President, we have no public comments via this item.
Thank you, Ms. Jamerson. Do we have any blue cards for this item?
Madam President, we have no blue cards for this item.
Thank you. I'd like to call for a motion to approve items 1 through 3 on the consent agenda.
Move items 1 to 3 on the consent agenda.
Moved by Ms. Fortuna and seconded by Mr. Bettis. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those items are approved unanimously. Thanks all. I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 2:45 p.m.